Hey AP Psych students, Megan here with Fiveable, and tonight we're going to have a pretty chill night. We're just going to go over the FRQs. Basically what I did is prepared like a sample response to each of the released FRQs, but let me know in the chat how you felt about the AP test. I hope it went well for all of you. And just a little note, the FRQs for tonight, there were two sets. There was an East Coast set and a West Coast set this year for AP Psych. And so I'm going to go through both sets. I'm going to start with the East Coast set. That's the one I feel a little more comfortable with just because that's the one that my students had. And so we've spent some time discussing it and talking through it. And then I will go over the West Coast set second. So let me know if you have any questions as we go. But like I said, I'm just going to go through a sample response for each of the various FRQ questions. And then I can answer any questions you guys have. So the first one is a bit wordy to get through. Oops. So the FRQ1, the East Coast, yep, both versions. So a psychologist, this is the East Coast version, FRQ1. A psychologist conducted a study at her home during an annual activity of children wearing masks and going door to door receiving candy. Some of the children arrived alone, while others arrived in a group. Over the course of the night, the psychologist asked half of the children to remove their masks when they arrived at the door. The remaining half kept their masks on. The psychologist told everyone to take only one piece of candy. She then went inside the house, leaving the bowl of candy outside. This gave children the opportunity to take additional candy. The psychologist measured the percentage of children who took additional candy. The psychologist's hypotheses were that children would take more candy when they were alone and that children would take more candy when they were masked. The results are shown in the graph. Well, it says below, but above. Assume all differences are significant. So this is obviously a research-based question. We talked about this, so hopefully you guys were prepared for possibly having to look at some charts or graphs. But when we can see here that the solo children, a lower percent of them took more candy than the grouped children. And then we also see that those with their masks on took a higher percentage of those kids took candy than those without the masks. So this is the prompt. Like I said, it's pretty lengthy. And then these are the questions associated with it. So part A asks us to identify the operational definition of the dependent variable in this study. Part B asks how the data support or do not support each of the psychologist's hypotheses. C asks us to explain why the psychologist cannot generalize her findings to all children. D asks why this is not a naturalistic observation. E then asks us to apply the terms of modeling, deindividuation, and Kohlberg's preconventional stage. So I broke it down one by one just to make it a little bit easier. And if we need to flip back to the question at all or to the chart, just let me know and I can flip back and forth because I know it was a really long prompt. So the first part says, identify the operational definition of the dependent variable. So I just defined both of those terms. Again, not necessarily going to score you points, but it can show you your understanding. And so operational definitions lay out the specifics of an experiment, like how a variable will be precisely measured to ensure replication. The dependent variable is in an experiment would be what measures the outcome of the experiment. So in this above stated experiment, the dependent variable is the percentage of children that each take an additional piece of candy. So first, I believe that you're going to identify it, which is pretty easy. It's just the percent of kids that are taking the additional candy. And then you have to talk about how we're going to find an extra piece of candy. And so I just said additional candy being measured as individually wrapped pieces over the one original piece. And so that is the gist of what you should have wrote for that one. I think that was fairly straightforward. Sophia, I don't do this. I'm just reading your comment right now. No, the dependent variable is what actually could change based on what you're manipulating in the experiment. So we're looking to see if a kid wearing a mask or not wearing a mask impacts the outcome, and then we measure how much candy they take. So the dependent variable changes based on, in theory, what the independent variable does. And Zach, I'm glad you're taking this class next year. Hopefully you subscribe to Fiveable, and we'll review all next year as we get closer to the test. So that is part one. Part B, I think, is a little bit trickier because it's asking you to explain how the data supports each of the hypotheses. My guess is that this one is going to be worth 2 points. They're going to give you 1 point for the first hypothesis and 1 point for the second hypothesis. So maybe even if you didn't get them both right, you'll still get one of those points. And so I defined hypotheses because that's my vocab in this prompt. And so it says, a hypothesis is a tentative statement about the relationship between two variables. The researcher's first hypothesis is that children would take more candy when alone. And so if we look at that, we look at the dark black boxes. That represents the kids who are alone. Clearly, this hypothesis is not supported because both of the black solo children boxes are lower than the ones that are in groups. So you have to say that this data does not support this hypothesis and then explain why. Because when we look at the bar graph, it shows that only 7.5% of children, it should say not with a mask, 7.5% of children with a mask who were alone took candy, but 20.8% in a group did. So I just typed that wrong. The same holds true for those that kept masks on, 21.4% and 57.2% taking candy, respectively. So you just have to reference the data to show that you understand what the chart is showing. Then you have to move on to the second hypothesis. The researcher's other hypothesis is that children would take more candy while masked. This hypothesis appears to be true, as the bar graph shows that those alone with the mask on, again, typo, I apologize, took extra candy 21.4% of the time, and in a group did so 57.2% of the time, both of which are statistically significant compared to their unmasked counterparts. So you just have to basically show that you can interpret the graph and that you're saying in one it's supported and in one it's not. Okay, part C asks why the psychologist cannot generalize her findings. I'll give you a second to read that. Shrikar, I think that would be fine. I don't know that you need to specifically reference the percentages. The tricky part here is that obviously I'm not privy to how they're for sure going to be grading it, but I would say I don't think that you have to go into all of the exact percentages. Just stating that one is more than the other, I think, would be sufficient. So I think you're fine with that. And yeah, so again, as we go through this, also keep in mind, I, again, am not a FRQ grader, and so I don't make the rubrics or things like that. These are just my best guesses for what would be on there. Part A was just, what was part A? Identifying the dependent variable and defining it, so that it's the percent of candy that they took, and saying that how we're going to measure that. All right, so part C. I said one way we can ensure experiments are generalizable to the population is by using random assignment. Random assignment is used in an experiment to ensure that all participants have an equal chance of being chosen to participate in the control or experimental group. Since the researcher did not randomly assign children, there could be other factors at play which impact the results of the study. And then you need to give me an example of one. And you could have made up a variety of examples. Mine is that perhaps all of the solo children are only children in their families, while the group of children are siblings. And so therefore that could be a nurturing or nature factor regarding sibling dynamics at play, which could impact the outcome of the study. You could also have said, without random assignment, you're not sure if maybe all of one group is coming from a different socioeconomic status. I would say You need an example. Let me read it again. Explain why the psychologist. Maybe not a specific example, as long as you allude to the fact that there could be other factors at play. If you make that allude to that fact by just saying like, oh, we can't be sure that, you know, one group doesn't differ from the other, I think that would be fine. And Valentina, you don't necessarily have to define the term to score the points. I always just encourage it because it can show a deeper level of understanding and it gives you a better chance of getting the points. And then I see that we're asking about random sampling. The thing with an experiment is you're not always going to get random sampling, which is why we do random assignment. So I don't, random sampling. That would score, because random sampling can't always be done, right? If I am doing an experiment, she's only picking kids from her neighborhood, so she can't randomly sample in this experiment. Random sampling, excuse me, I think often more refers to like if I'm doing a survey or something like that, I just have to take a random sample of the population. So depending how you worded it, but I'm not sure if that would score or not. And so, yeah, I think the better answer here is random assignment, personally. But again, I don't write the rubric, so I'm not 100% sure. I feel like that would score over random assignment, though. Let me sit on that for a while, and I'll come back to that towards the end. Let me keep thinking about that, because I'm just not 100% sure about that. So then part D asks you to explain why it's not a naturalistic observation. And the reason it's not a naturalistic observation is a study in which a researcher watches and records data without interfering with the habitat. In this study, it's not a naturalistic observation because the researcher involved herself in the situation, because she got involved and said, hey, I only want you to take one piece of candy. Here it is. Now I'm going inside. She's interfering with the situation, which makes it not a naturalistic observation. So I thought that one was pretty straightforward. Hopefully you guys did too. But that would be my most basic answer for that one of why it's not that. Yep, manipulated the independent variable is totally fine. Anything about her manipulating or being involved in the situation, I think is totally acceptable. Okay, and then like I said, we'll come back to that in a little bit. I'm just trying to do a little bit more reading about here what I'm talking about. Okay. Then part E says, explain how each of the following might have played a role in the children's behavior. Modeling. So modeling occurs through observational learning when a person watches others perform a task and then learns or mimics the behavior later on. And then you would just have to say that the children could have seen other kids take extra candy, so then they also took extra candy, or other kids could have seen that everyone obeyed the rules and only took one piece of candy, so they were more likely to take one piece of candy. Basically, you have to mention the kids watching someone else do something, and then they mimic that behavior. Yes, there's definitely leniency in how they score it. Basically, they have a generic rubric with examples in it that just says, like, an example similar to this would score if they say this. Every once in a while, there'll be like a do not score part of the rubric too that says like do not score a point like this. But there's definitely leniency. These are just how I would have wrote them. But my examples are definitely not the only examples you could have used. My way of explaining it is definitely not the only way. So as long as you're kind of hitting the same big ideas that I'm saying, then you should be fine. After modeling, we have deindividuation. Deindividuation occurs when someone is immersed in a group identity or feels hidden in some way thus acting in ways they might not normally. De-individuation, there's two ways I could have seen you apply it in this situation. You could say the kids in the group de-individuated because they were part of a group, and that's why they were more apt to take more than one piece of candy. Or you could have said the kids with the masks on were hidden in their identity, which allowed them to de-individuate, and that's why they were more likely to disobey the instructions. Either one of those would be fine, but I think you'd have to either mention the fact that in the group setting, they lose some of their responsibility, or with the mask on, they lose some of their responsibility. Either way, I think both of those would be fine and score. And then lastly, how does Lawrence Kohlberg's preconventional stage fit this? So basically, this stage of development is all about being concerned with reward or punishment. And so this could influence the children's behavior and cause them to not take additional candy for fear of being caught and punished. So basically, because at this stage, it's all about like, I either want this reward or I don't want to be punished. And so therefore, I'm not going to take the candy because if I do, I might get in trouble. That sort of thing, I think, would be the best answer there. Okay. All right. Any other questions about this one? Otherwise, we're going to move on. All right. The second FRQ then on the East Coast was about Ludi. Ludi. I'm going to say Ludi. I feel like that's how it's pronounced. As a senior in high school, Ludi worked as an assistant to the children's librarian in his town library. Sorry, I'm just typing a response and now I'm like not able to multitask. I found. Yeah. Okay. So Ludi used to work as a children's assistant in his library. He enjoys shelving books. Although the library was normally a quiet place, sometimes the children's section becomes quite noisy. After working in an unfulfilling desk job for 30 years, Ludi recalls how much he enjoyed working at the library and decides to go back as a volunteer, creating programs for disadvantaged children. Please describe how each of the following concepts relates to Ludi's return. All right, so that is the gist of it. And I think if you said she, that's fine. They're going to know who you're talking about. I don't think that would take points off, no. Again, typically speaking, they want to give you the points, right? They're not out to be like jerks about grading it. So I think you're fine as long as you got the actual terms right. So for this one, I thought this one was more straightforward. It's just tell me how the term relates to the situation. And so for the first one, how would these help Ludi, or how does these relate to Ludi? Crystallized intelligence refers to our accumulated wealth of knowledge that increases over time. So it's just like all of our knowledge that we gain throughout our lives. And so you could say that this would help Ludi because his previous experiences at the library taught him where specific books are shelved, which allows him to complete his job efficiently. So anything about his prior knowledge, basically, something that he learned in his past and he's able to apply it now in his current setting. Yeah, you could give a variety of examples. Mine was just shelving books. That doesn't mean that that's the only right answer, just my example. And honestly, I wouldn't worry about missing a few here or there. The average on the FRQs is usually below a 50%. So if you're getting at 50% or even above, you're crushing it. So I would not stress about missing a few. This is the hard part of the exam. So feel good about yourself. If so, you're like, yeah, I got most of those. Altruism is the second term. This one really messed my students up, which kind of surprised me. Because I guess I thought maybe that was just a word that people knew, like just a general vocab word, even if you didn't know it in relationship to psychology, but I guess not. So altruism is this idea of acting in the concern for others without your own regard in mind. Altruism could help Ludi with his gig at the library as he works with disadvantaged youth. Ludi puts their care and well-being in front of himself and works to serve and improve their lives. So yep, willingness to help others is probably fine. So he's wanting to work and serve other people. I thought the easiest connection there was to the disadvantaged kids mentioned in the prompt, but I'm sure you could also mention he wants to help anyone at the library. That would be fine as well. Excuse me on the hiccups. All right. Extroversion. I thought you guys lucked out. Extroversion is this idea of a person's outgoingness, talkativity, etc., things like that. And so you could say anything about Ludi, again, I don't know, being an extrovert, which might make him feel comfortable talking to library patrons and helping them out. I thought this was a pretty broad one that you could apply, but basically just having him feel comfortable working with others, talking with others, and relating to them in some way, shape, or form. Broca's area was another one that I thought was just kind of, I don't know, odd maybe for this situation, but saying something about how it's part of the brain responsible for creating speech. Broca's area allows Ludi to physically speak to patrons at the library and tell them where a book is located. Sorry, again, I can't multitask. All right, and then self-efficacy. This one I think is tricky because I think self-efficacy and self-esteem. And so for this one, talking about a person's belief in their own abilities to achieve goals. It's kind of that like intrinsic value in themselves. And so, yeah, efficiency too. I guess I didn't think about that one. Yeah, if Ludi has high self-efficacy and his goal is to help disadvantaged youth, then he will believe in himself that he has the ability to change lives, which will inspire him with his work with the children. Yes, Zach, you are correct. So Broca is actually like making the words the physical kind of part of it, I guess. That's how I usually explain it. And Wernicke's area is more with like making sense. You would say words, but they might be jumbled and things like that. So that's those three. Again, I think this FRQs may be a little bit easier. It just maybe is more straightforward, I guess, than the other one. Episodic memory refers to a person's unique memory of a specific event. Ludi remembers 30 years ago that he had a fun time shelving books, which today leads him to want to continue working at a library. And I just want to give a shout out. I think I just saw that John Mole was in the chat. Dr. John Mole, I took your FRQ. I took your responses that you posted online and I changed them up a little bit, but I used the kind of basic gist of them. So thank you for that because it helped me prepare these. So I wanted to give you a shout out so everyone can say hi and thank you to you as well while you're here. So episodic memory, you're going to have to reference a specific event that they are thinking back to. So Ludi remembers 30 years ago that he had a fun time shelving books, which today leads him to want to continue working at a library. You might even want to be more specific than that to like a very specific event that like he remembers something that happened at the library a long time ago, and then he uses that memory today to help him in his volunteerism at the library. I'm not sure how specific you'll have to be about what that memory is. And then lastly, self-actualization. Here we're moving up Maslow's hierarchy and talking about a person fulfilling their potential in life. If Ludi feels that his goal in life is to work with and help children succeed, this job at the library might help him reach that goal of self-actualization and being the best person that he can be. Yeah, so I feel good about that one. I feel like this one's going to score a little bit higher than the first one. I think the first one will score, I don't know, if there's 7 or 8 terms on that, if they break that one down, I'm guessing that one will be like a high 2, maybe a low 3 for an average. And this one I'm guessing will be maybe like a mid-3 average, because it seems a little more straightforward. That would easily be a 5, Shrieker, if you scored that on the FRQs. Definitely would be a 5. So I would not be stressed about that too much. All right. Now we're moving to the West Coast FRQs, which I do not, like I said, feel as confident about because I haven't gone over these with my students. But again, with the help of Dr. John Moore, I composed some of these, and disagree at all, he can help us out in the chat there too. So another experiment here. So both East and West Coast got a research-based FRQ, which is good. Professor Mendez conducts an experiment to investigate the effects of a new medication for treating the symptoms of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So part A, explain the concept of compulsion in the context of obsessive compulsive disorder. And then part B asks to explain how each of the following would be used in this experiment to help establish cause and effect. So we'll start with part A. So I just defined compulsion. A compulsion is a behavior that one feels, I don't know, compelled is probably not the best choice of words there, but compelled to repeat, often to reduce a feeling of anxiety. In the case of OCD, the compulsion may be hand washing, which may occur in response to obsessive thoughts about germs and cleanliness. By repetitively washing hands, it may help rid the anxiety caused by the obsessions. So I'm basically just, you have to explain how compulsion fits into the cycle of OCD, which is there's these thoughts and these obsessions that you have, which then often lead to actions, which are your compulsions to make you feel better or to like reduce that anxiety. So you don't have to say hand washing or anything like that. I just gave that because that's a pretty generic example in regards to OCD. So anything like that would have been fine. Part B, explain why each of the following would be used in this experiment to help establish cause and effect. So here we're coming back to this term random assignment. Again, random assignment is to ensure that all participants have an equal chance of being chosen to participate in either the control or experimental group. Random assignment is necessary to determine cause and effect to ensure that confounding variables are mitigated. A confounding variable in this case could be that those with more severe OCD may want to try the new drug, and thus we may not see the true results or effects of the new medication. Because if we aren't randomly assigning them to groups, maybe like the people with more severe symptoms want to try the medication to see if it'll make them feel better, but then we're not testing people with like less severe symptoms, which could then give us inaccurate results. There's a lot of different ways you could talk about that. Streaker, why don't you ask, and I hope this is okay, John, if you're still here in the chat, about that random sampling question you had, because I don't think that that would score, but maybe John would have an answer to that from the first FRQ prompt. Yeah, okay. You also need to then explain how the placebo effect might play a role here in the experiment of some medication for OCD. And so a placebo is an inert substance used to help prevent bias or expectation. If those that receive the actual drug see better results than those on the placebo, we can assume that the new medication is effective. I thought that was pretty straightforward. So basically, you're just saying that we use the placebo so that we can actually compare the results with the actual medication to the inert substance. Shrieker, are you still there? Can you retype that question about that you had about random sampling? I think the gist of it was for the first FRQ prompt where it said, why can't she generalize the findings of her experiment? And it was, we talked about random assignment being the reason. And he was asking about random sampling, or Shrieker was asking about random sampling. And I felt like that wouldn't score because we can't always use random sampling in an experiment. Right? I feel like that's right, but I just would like someone else's opinion on that since I'm a little bit uncertain. So yeah, that's placebo. Oh, it would score. Okay. Interesting. Professor Mendez presents this research then at an international conference. After the presentation, audience members meet to discuss this research, explain how each of the following may affect the attendees' discussion of the research. So groupthink refers to the dynamic that it can occur when people who work together don't always think through the problems. It leads to poor decision making because everyone wants to be in harmony. So in this setting, maybe most professionals think that the drug should be immediately released. However, one person may be hesitant to speak against the group due to the phenomenon of groupthink, which then leads to a bad decision about the medication being made, or for them to not consider all options or side effects or things like that. So basically, groupthink is inhibiting the group from actually considering all angles because they all just appear to be in agreement, and we lack that sort of critical thinking. I would say that it would score because generalizability refers to taking the same point. Okay, good. Yeah, I struggle with that. My students asked me about that too, and I wasn't sure if that would score or not. So that's good to hear your opinion on that. Thank you, John. Display rules. This is one that had people freaking out a little bit. So display rules refers to like social group norms of how you should express yourself in a given situation. So, for example, if people in this group come from a culture where it is not common to be expressive in a discussion, so if you're just kind of sitting there blank face, not having much of a reaction, people may incorrectly assume that you're uninterested in the discussion or that you're being rude, and then that could lead to conflicts within the group because they think you're not acting the right way or that you're disinterested or angry or something like that. So that's how I would have answered that. There's a lot of ways that you could use, I think, that answer, but that's what display rules are. And so they're like culturally significant. I think when we talk about like collectivists versus in cultures and things like that, that's maybe where this come in. Otherwise, it might come in the motivation and emotion unit. But I know I don't really talk about this one a ton. So it's hit or miss, you know, altruism, display rules. There was tricky ones on both of the FRQs. All right, belief perseverance refers to the fact that people often hold on to their original opinion, even after I've shown you evidence that you might be wrong. And so in the discussion, a participant is shown that actually there's contrary research out there. However, even in the face of this contrary evidence, you maintain your belief. This could then lead to tension in the discussion process. So the fact that you aren't going to change your opinion, even though I'm showing you evidence that proves that you're wrong, that's not a good group dynamic, right? And that could lead to conflict or tension. Okay. And then we have cocktail party effect. I thought this one was maybe a little bit trickier, but basically cocktail party effect refers to the brain's ability to auditorily focus on a given stimuli in a crowded space. Like if I heard my name in a crowded room, I can kind of like key into that and like listen to it. So in the intense discussions, everyone's focused at the topic at hand until Mary heard someone in the group next to her mention her name. She then focused her attention and tuned out her group to focus on what the other table was saying about her. And then, you know, she's missing out on the conversation that's happening in her group because with the cocktail party effect, she's tuning in to another group. Yeah. And then the last prompt, we did some of these practice prompts about how this could help or hinder you. It's a very common AP Psych exam FRQ format, so hopefully you guys had seen this before. But Carl is planning for finals week. He has exams in 4 classes in a group project. For part A, provide a specific application of how each of the following could help Carl succeed on his 4 exams. So there's state-dependent memory, which is this idea that we remember things better when we are in the same sort of consciousness as when we learned it. So, for example, if Carl studies for his finals and he drinks a lot of coffee and there's a lot of caffeine in it, he might be super duper alert when he's studying. And so in order to take advantage of state-dependent memory, he should also make sure that he's hyper alert and drink coffee prior to his exams as well. You could also say something about maybe Carl studies while high on drugs, and that frame of mind then would help him if he was in that same frame of mind on the exam. It just has to be talking about being in the same sort of level or state of consciousness when learning the material as then when you try to apply the material during the exam. So anything like that would score. Distributed practice refers to the idea of spreading out your studying over multiple time periods, which leads to better retrieval rates. So in order for Carl to do well on his finals, he should start to study several weeks in advance and space it out instead of cramming it all in at the last minute. So just mentioning basically that the studying is spread out over a period of time, like weeks, instead of like all the night before would score. I don't know how specific you're going to have to be. I wonder if I think you'll definitely need to mention a span of time that you've spread it out for and not cramming. Not cramming might score on its own depending how generous they are with the rubric. So we'll have to see how that goes. And then does long-term potentiation factor in? I thought this was a pretty tricky one, just because it's not as maybe common of a term that you go over. I know we teach it, but it's not super. Yeah, how can the Wernicke's area? Sorry, I'm distracted again. All right, so long-term potentiation is a lasting strengthening of a synaptic connection between nerve cells as we learn. So as Carl studies, the LTP helps him create new connections in the brain. And those new connections then help them when it's test time because those connections have strengthened and formed, which then allows him to easily retrieve the information that he studied during his exams. So that is the gist of that. I think LTP is pretty straightforward. I just think it's a trickier term that maybe not as many of you remembered. And then here we see self-efficacy again. So they definitely were trying to hammer that one home this year. They put it on both FRQs, just different prompts. All right, self-efficacy again, the belief we are in control of our own outcomes and can be successful, et cetera, et cetera. If Carl believes that he has the ability to succeed, he will go into his exams feeling confident and better prepared than if he had low self-efficacy. I was not sure about this one, I felt like that was kind of vague, but I feel like that's kind of what they're getting at. It almost alludes to this idea like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I wonder how that will be worded on the rubric. But I think that is the gist of what would be needed there to score, in my opinion. Again, I don't write the rubrics. I wish I did, but I don't. So yeah. All right. And then, oh, good. Convergent thinking. Now we're moving on to the group project. So that's the key here is in reading this question. The first part had to do with studying for his exams. And now this part B is about the project. So hopefully you read that carefully and are going to be applying it to the proper scenario. So for convergent thinking, it's kind of this idea that we're narrowing down to one correct answer, or we're narrowing down our possible solutions. So this could hinder, again, that's the key there, the success of the group because he will not be able to be creative and think of many solutions. Instead, he may be stuck on one way of thinking about the project or things related to the project. They're all focused on one specific way of doing it, and therefore they can't think of other more unique or better ways to approach this group project, which then could hurt them in their overall grading. Informational social influence refers to when a person conforms to what others think based on the facts or them being seen as being correct or knowing more than you do about a certain situation. So perhaps Carl's group mates convince him that statistics show people who wing it on their final project score better. This leads Carl to not work on the project ahead of time, which leaves him unprepared when it comes time to finish the project, which would hurt them in the long run. So he's using the facts or statistics that his group mates told him about winging it, and then that causes him to not properly prepare for the group project. And then regression. So regression is a defense mechanism where we revert to an earlier stage of development to protect ourselves from stress and anxiety. Carl, I always just use, I think, cry and suck your thumb. I think, John, you said this too. It's just kind of the easiest infantile kind of behavior that we can show as a reversion too. And so Carl begins to cry and suck his thumb in response to the stress of the project. He is unable to then complete his part because he's so busy having a tantrum and crying that he can't complete it and fails the class. So you just have to talk about him going back to some sort of an earlier stage of development. So acting like a child in some way, shape, or form, and then how that would hinder his performance on this task. And I think, oh, that is the last one. So that, I think, is it for the 2 FRQs. If you guys have any other questions and you want to throw them in the chat real quick, I'll stick around for a second. But otherwise, you can always reach out on the Facebook group, or you can reach out via email how you registered for Fiveable. But I feel good about these FRQs. I hope you guys do too. I hope you felt good about the AP exam. It's time now to relax and have some fun and head into summer pretty soon and just relax. But I saw some of you saying in the chat that you plan on taking AP Psych next year. So hopefully we will see you here in the coming months when we pick back up in September. Okay. Difference between self-efficacy and self-fulfilling prophecy. So self-efficacy is sort of this like belief in yourself of being capable to do something. Self-fulfilling prophecy is more of like almost like a 3-pronged approach. It has to do with like, how do I want to say this? Like a reinforcement of your thoughts. So if I think I'm dumb, which this is like the easiest example, let's say my teacher calls me dumb. And so then I start to feel dumb, right? My thoughts are that I'm dumb. And then I score bad on my next exam because I feel dumb, right? My self-esteem is low, things like that. And then my teacher sees the grade on the test and like, oh yeah, she is dumb. And so it creates this self-fulfilling cycle of my thoughts and my actions matching others' perceptions about me. Whereas self-efficacy is more like your own beliefs about yourself and being able to achieve and be successful. I guess that's how I would explain it. Hopefully that makes sense. My brain is a bit fried. It's May. So, all right, I'm going to log off for the night, but it was great talking to you. Thank you guys for all being here. Make sure you connect to the Fiveable Facebook groups to get updates and things like that for next year, and link up with other AP students in AP Kogo and Huge and all of those other classes. So I hope you have a great night, and I hope you guys have a great summer and enjoy some time off. And I hope I will see some of you next year.